So imagine a pathogen that is so resilient, it literally builds a thick, waxy, like lipid-rich armor around itself.
It's honestly a masterclass in survival.
Right. And when your body tries to fight it, this pathogen doesn't just, evade your immune system. It
Yeah.
actively breaks into your immune cells, makes a home there, and then just hits the pause button on its own biology.
Yeah, it can go entirely dormant, just sleeping inside your body for decades, completely invisible to modern medicine.
Just waiting for a moment of weakness to wake up.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying. And that survival mechanism, that's our mission for this deep dive. Today we're going through the sources we've gathered to unpack the pharmacology of antitubercular drugs, so anti-TB drugs.
Because when you look at the research, one thing becomes glaringly obvious right away. You cannot treat this with a standard off-the-shelf antibiotic prescription.
Right, like if you get a normal sinus infection, you take a pill for a week and you're done. But TB requires highly specialized agents. They are literally engineered to take down a fortress. So, okay, let's unpack this. To understand why modern TB treatment is this grueling multi-drug marathon, we really need to look at the messy, dramatic history of how we first tried to kill it.
Yeah, and it's a history characterized by a lot of desperate false starts, honestly. To set the stage, we have to look back to 1882.
That's when Robert Koch comes in, right?
Right. The German physician Robert Koch. That was the year he first identified the tubercle bacillus. We actually still commemorate that date, March 24th, as World TB Day.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but simply identifying the villain doesn't give you a weapon against it. Koch attempted to create a cure he called tuberculin, but, well, it was a tragic failure.
Tragic in what way? Like it just didn't work?
Worse. In a lot of clinical cases, injecting patients with it triggered massive fatal inflammatory responses.
Oh, man. So the medical world knew exactly what was destroying people's lungs, but they had absolutely zero biochemical tools to stop it?
Literally none. For decades, millions of people died while scientists were largely helpless. Until, we get to 1943.
Right. 1943 changes everything. We're in a lab at Rutgers University. And from the sources, there's a graduate student named Albert Schatz working under this prominent microbiologist, Selman Waksman. And Schatz isolates a novel compound from soil bacteria, specifically from an actinomycete in the soil.
Which is really fascinating when you think about where our drugs come from.
Wait, what is an actinomycete exactly?
So it's a type of branching bacteria found naturally in dirt. And it secretes its own natural antibiotics to fight off other competing microbes in the soil environment.
Oh, so it's like chemical warfare in the dirt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Schatz manages to isolate one of these chemical weapons. They call it streptomycin.
And they realize pretty quickly that it actually works against TB. By 1944, they are using it on a human patient at the Mayo Clinic. And the results are just unprecedented. People who were literally wasting away are suddenly recovering.
It was a miracle at the time.
It was. But the behind-the-scenes drama of this discovery is wild. So Waksman, the lab director, ends up getting the 1952 Nobel Prize for this. He gets all the global glory.
Right, well, the grad student gets left in the shadows.
Completely sidelined. Schatz, the guy who spent hours actually doing the dangerous bench work and isolating the drug, he got nothing at first. It got so bad that he had to sue Waksman in 1950 just to get legal recognition and a share of the royalties.
Wow.
He won the lawsuit, but history mostly remembered Waksman anyway.
It remains one of the great cautionary tales of academic credit, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, the legacy of streptomycin goes way beyond the Nobel drama, or even just treating TB.
How so?
Well, the way the medical community decided to test this drug literally set the template for all of modern medicine.
Oh, you're talking about the 1948 trial.
Yes. So the British Medical Research Council needed to know for absolute certain if streptomycin was truly effective, right?
Right.
But they had a very limited supply of the drug.
Sure, they couldn't just give it to everyone.
Exactly. So they set up a trial. But they knew that if they let doctors choose who got the drug, the doctors would naturally give it to their sickest patients out of compassion.
Which makes sense humanly, but it would totally skew the data.
Right, because if all the sickest patients die anyway, the drug looks like a failure. To prevent that bias, they used sealed envelopes to randomly assign patients.
Wait, literally sealed envelopes?
Literally sealed envelopes. The doctor would open the envelope, and the patient would either get streptomycin plus bed rest or just bed rest alone.
So a literal blind draw determined your treatment.
It was revolutionary. This is widely considered the very first properly randomized controlled clinical trial in the history of medicine.
It's amazing.
Yeah, the entire modern framework for testing whether a pharmaceutical actually works. The gold standard of medical research that you and I rely on today was born right there, out of the sheer necessity to figure out how to fight TB.
That is an incredible legacy. But if I'm listening to this, I'm immediately wondering if streptomycin was this absolute miracle drug in 1944, why isn't it the main thing we use today? Like, why do we need that complicated multi-drug marathon that I mentioned earlier?
Because the medical community learned a very hard lesson about evolution. Streptomycin worked brilliantly at first, but when they used it entirely on its own, a practice we call monotherapy, the clinical success collapsed within weeks.
Weeks. That fast.
Oh yeah, the drug would just abruptly stop working, and the patients would deteriorate all over again.
See, I always used to hear people say things like, oh, the bacteria learn how to fight the drug, but it's not actually a learning process at all, is it?
Not even slightly. I mean, bacteria don't have brains, right? They don't learn.
Yeah.
What we're really talking about is selection pressure.
Okay, break that down for me.
So in any massive population of bacteria in a person's lungs, a tiny, tiny fraction of them will naturally possess a random genetic mutation that makes them immune to streptomycin. It's just a numbers game.
So they're already immune before the drug even hits them.
Exactly. When you hit the patient with just that one drug, you massacre all the vulnerable bacteria, but you leave behind those few mutants.
And suddenly those mutants have zero competition for nutrients, so they multiply like crazy.
Precisely. You haven't trained them, you've just systematically selected for the invincible ones.
Yeah.
Monotherapy was an immediate and catastrophic failure.
Wow.
And that failure forced scientists to fundamentally rethink the biology of this pathogen. They realized that a TB infection is not just one uniform, identical army of bacteria standing in a field.
Right. Thinking about this from the sources, it almost feels like we're fighting a villain's army, but the army has entirely different divisions operating in completely different terrains within the lung.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like you've got the fast-growing frontline troops out in the open, rapidly multiplying. Then you've got soldiers hiding in acidic trenches, which in the human body are inside your own macrophages.
Right.
And finally, you have these deep cover sleeper cells buried in the necrotic lung tissue, not dividing at all, just waiting.
And that hits at the very core of the pharmacological puzzle. Because TB exists in these diverse metabolic subpopulations, no single biochemical mechanism can kill all of them.
Because they're all acting differently.
Exactly. A drug that targets bacteria while they are actively dividing will do absolutely nothing to the sleeper cells that have paused their metabolism. The foundational principle of modern TB pharmacology is that you need a highly specific weapon for each subpopulation.
Which brings us to the famous first-line drug regimen, also known as the RIP regimen, RIPE. It's 4 specific medications. So let's look at how this biochemical masterpiece actually solves the problems you just laid out.
Sure.
The first major hurdle is sheer numbers, right? The fast-growing frontline troops. How do we take them out?
We hit them with isoniazid. It was discovered in 1952 by actually 3 rival pharma groups simultaneously.
Oh, that must have been a tense patent race.
Very. And it's a fascinating molecule. Isoniazid is a prodrug. That means when you swallow the pill, the chemical is completely inactive. It's harmless.
Wait, so how does it do anything?
It relies on a Trojan horse mechanism. The drug circulates in your body inactive until it gets absorbed by the TB bacteria itself.
Oh, it's sneaky.
Yeah. Inside the bacteria, there's a specific enzyme called CatG. When CatG interacts with isoniazid, it accidentally activates the drug, turning it into a lethal compound. The bacteria literally arm the bomb that kills them.
That is brilliant. And once the bomb goes off,
The active drug aggressively blocks the bacteria from synthesizing mycolic acid.
which is the armor.
Right? If you remember that thick, waxy armor we talked about in the beginning, mycolic acids are the crucial building blocks of that armor. If the bacteria are actively dividing and trying to build new cell walls, isoniazid halts that process, and the bacteria essentially fall apart.
So it's incredibly effective on the active ones.
Very. It can drop the bacterial count in a patient's sputum by roughly 90% in just the first 2 days in treatment.
Okay, so we massacre the front line and the bacterial load plummets. But because isoniazid only works on bacteria actively building their walls, it's totally useless against the ones hiding in the trenches.
Which brings us to our second drug in the RAPE regimen, pyrazinamide. This is our trench fighter.
Because it works specifically in the acid, right?
That's the key. Pyrazinamide is totally inactive at a normal physiological pH. But inside your macrophages and inside the inflamed, dying tissue in the lung lesions, the environment is highly acidic.
So it uses the terrain against them.
Exactly. When the drug enters that acid, it converts to its active form, pyrazinoic acid, It's uniquely designed to seek out and destroy the bacteria, hiding where other drugs simply cannot function.
But the sources highlight a major catch with pyrazinamide. Doctors typically pull it from the treatment plan after just 2 months. Like, if it's so good at clearing the trenches, why stop using it so early?
Toxicity. Continuing it beyond 2 months doesn't yield much additional benefit for the patient, but it does cause compounding severe side effects.
Like what?
The most notable are liver toxicity and a sharp increase in uric acid levels in the blood.
Ouch. Doesn't that cause gout?
It does. That uric acid crystallizes in the joints, causing agonizing gout-like pain. Once pyrazinamide has done its specific job of clearing out the acidic environments, you really have to stop it to protect the patient.
All right, so the fast growers are decimated, the acidic trenches are cleared, but we still have those deep cover sleeper cells that aren't dividing and aren't in the acid. How do we get to them without poisoning the patient?
We use rifampin. This was discovered from a soil sample taken in the south of France, actually.
Right.
And it completely revolutionized the timeline of TB treatment.
Really? How long was treatment before?
Before rifampin, patients were subjected to drug cocktails for 18 to 24 months. Rifampin cut that down to 6.
Just by targeting the sleeper cells, how does it do that?
It targets an entirely different mechanism. Rifampin inhibits the bacterial enzyme that reads DNA, the RNA polymerase.
Oh, so it stops transcription.
Right. By physically binding to this enzyme, it stops the bacteria from reading its own genetic instruction manual. Because it attacks this fundamental process, rather than just cell wall building, it works even on the slowly dividing or intermittently dividing bacteria.
So it basically shuts down their core operating system regardless of whether they are awake or asleep.
Exactly. We call it unique sterilizing activity. Rifampin is the assassin that finds and sterilizes those dormant cells. If you don't use rifampin, those sleeper cells will simply wake up 8 months down the line, and the patient suffers a devastating relapse.
Wow. Okay, we have one major problem left, though. We have these 3 incredible weapons, isoniazid, pyrazinamide, rifampin, but we need a way to protect them from that selection pressure we talked about earlier.
Right, the mutation risk.
Because when a patient first comes in, doctors don't instantly know if the strain they have is already resistant to something.
That is where the fourth drug comes in, ethambutol. Ethambutol is essentially the shield for the other drugs. It's a weaker medication that interferes with the assembly of the bacterial cell wall.
How does weakening the wall protect the other drugs from resistance, though?
Well, by keeping the bacterial cell wall compromised and porous, it ensures that the big guns like isoniazid and rifampin can easily penetrate the bacteria and reach lethal concentrations quickly.
Oh, I see. So it helps the main drugs overwhelm the bacteria before any naturally resistant mutants have a chance to survive and multiply.
Exactly. You use ethambutol at the very beginning of treatment to hold the line. Once the lab tests come back and confirm that the patient's specific TB strain is completely susceptible to the main drugs, you can usually drop the ethambutol.
Okay, so if we put this all together, the World Health Organization's standard regimen looks like this. You have a 2-month intensive phase where you hit the patient with all 4 drugs at once.
The RIPE phase.
Right. And this slaughters the fast growers, clears the acidic trenches, drops the overall bacterial load massively, and uses ethambutol to prevent resistance. Then, after those 2 months, you shift to a 4-month continuation phase where you just use isoniazid and rifampin.
Right. To quietly hunt down and sterilize any remaining sleeper cells.
6 months total.
And that is the biochemical masterpiece on paper.
Yeah, on paper is definitely the operative phrase here, because this raises a massive logistical issue. If I'm a patient and isoniazid drops my bacterial count by 90% in 2 days, I'm going to feel completely fine, maybe even totally cured in about 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, absolutely.
My fever is gone, my cough is gone. Why on earth would I keep taking a handful of toxic pills every single day for another 5 months?
You're touching on the exact paradox that represents the most consequential failure point in the history of TB pharmacology.
Yeah.
Biochemical perfection completely falls apart the moment it intersects with human psychology.
Because symptom relief is not the same thing as a biochemical cure.
Not even close.
Yeah.
You feel better because the fast growers are dead and the lung inflammation is subsided. But those sterilizing persisters, the sleeper cells, they are still there in the deep tissue.
Just waiting.
Yeah. If you stop taking your medication at week 4 because you feel healthy, those persisters will eventually wake up. And when they do, they wake up having survived a brief sublethal exposure to your drugs.
So the selection pressure happens all over again.
Exactly. This non-adherence patients stopping early or taking incomplete doses because they missed a few days is the absolute primary driver of multi-drug-resistant TB, or MDR-TB.
And there's a major misconception here that we should really clear up from the sources. When the general public hears the term MDR-TB, they often assume it's some new, exotic, super contagious species of bacteria that just emerged out of nowhere.
It's really not a different species at all. It is the exact same Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It just happens to be a strain that has acquired chromosomal mutations, making it immune to our two best weapons, isoniazid and rifampin.
So it's not like a new bug.
No, it's not necessarily more contagious. It is just infinitely harder and wildly more expensive to cure. If you develop MDR-TB, you are suddenly looking at 9 to 20 months of second-line drugs that have horrific, sometimes permanent side effects.
And you know, the tragedy of MDR-TB isn't just about patients feeling better and quitting early, though. Sometimes they quit because the medicine itself absolutely terrifies them.
Oh, the side effects.
Yeah, I was reading through the clinical notes in our sources, and the psychological toll of these drugs is wild. Rifampin, for instance, it turns your body fluids orange-red.
It does. It's a completely benign, harmless cosmetic effect caused by the drug's natural pigmentation.
But put yourself in the shoes of a patient. Imagine you haven't been adequately warned by your doctor, and suddenly your urine, your sweat, and your tears are bright orange-red. It can even permanently stain your contact lenses.
I know, it sounds like a horror movie.
I would be in full panic mode. I think my kidneys were shutting down or I was hemorrhaging internally.
And patients do panic. They flush the pills down the toilet immediately. It is a massive failure of clinical communication. You have a drug that is literally saving a person's life, and they abandon it because they believe it's killing them.
It's heartbreaking. And the side effects aren't just cosmetic either. Like, isoniazid structurally mimics vitamin B6, doesn't it?
Yes, the chemical structure is very similar to pyridoxine, which is vitamin B6. Because they look so similar biochemically, isoniazid interferes with your body's natural vitamin B6 metabolism, and it actively depletes your reserves.
And that causes real damage, right?
Yeah, this depletion can lead to severe peripheral neuropathy, which manifests as numbness, tingling, and sharp pain in the hands and feet.
Oh, that's awful.
To prevent permanent nerve damage, doctors almost always have to co-prescribe a B6 supplement alongside the TB drugs.
So think about this lived reality. You have a 6-month daily regimen, taking pills that make you pee orange, deplete your neurological vitamins, and cause gout-like joint pain, all to fight a disease that stopped making you cough 5 months ago. It's a psychological endurance test.
Which is exactly why the World Health Organization realized decades ago that they couldn't just hand people a pill bottle and hope for the best. In 1994, they formalized a global public health policy called DOTS, Directly Observed Treatment, short course.
Emphasizing the directly observed part, meaning what in practice?
Meaning a trained health worker literally sits across from you and physically watches you swallow every single pill, every single day, for 6 months.
Wait, literally? The amount of public health infrastructure required to do that on a global scale is unbelievable.
It's a monumental logistical undertaking. But the alternative self-directed partial treatment mathematically guarantees the creation of multi-drug-resistant strains. DOTS was engineered to solve a human behavior problem, not a chemical one.
Because at the end of the day, you're treating people, not just petri dishes. But what happens when that massive infrastructure breaks down? We're talking about individual adherence failing, but sometimes whole governmental systems fail.
And when they do, the epidemiological consequences are global. Take the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and 1990s. When the political and economic systems fragmented, their highly structured TB control programs collapsed with them. Drug supply chains were completely disrupted.
So you'd have clinics that might only have access to isoniazid for a month, and then maybe they run out and only have rifampin the next month?
Exactly. We call it monotherapy by accident. Patients were inadvertently subjected to a rotating buffet of single drugs.
Which is exactly what we said not to do.
Right. It was a giant unintentional breeding ground for mutations. That systemic collapse spawned an MDR-TB epidemic across Eastern Europe and Central Asia that public health officials are still aggressively fighting today.
And we just saw a modern version of systemic disruption with COVID-19.
We did. The global lockdowns completely derailed DOTS programs everywhere. People couldn't get to clinics, and health workers couldn't do home visits. Case detection and treatment initiation plummeted in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, the pandemic basically set global TB eradication efforts back by several years.
That really brings home why this matters right now for you, the listener. TB isn't some Victorian disease from a Charles Dickens novel. It's still one of the top infectious killers on the planet, and it is especially devastating for people living with HIV.
The intersection of TB and HIV is a pharmacological minefield, honestly. TB is actually the leading cause of death among people living with HIV. But trying to treat both diseases simultaneously is incredibly difficult, largely because of our friend rifampin.
The sleeper cell assassin, why does it cause problems with HIV?
So rifampin is a potent inducer of a specific liver enzyme system called cytochrome P450, specifically the CYP3A4 pathway. Essentially, it puts your liver's drug-clearing machinery into absolute overdrive.
So your liver starts clearing out everything else in your bloodstream way too fast.
Exactly. If you are taking HIV antiretroviral medications, the revved-up liver chews those drugs up and flushes them out before they can suppress the HIV virus.
Oh no, so it renders the HIV drugs useless.
Completely ineffective. It does the exact same thing to oral contraceptives, by the way. It's a massive clinical challenge for doctors to balance curing the TB without allowing the HIV viral load to rebound.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We spent this whole time talking about how the 6-month regimen is this sacred, immovable standard in medicine. The absolute minimum time mathematically needed to clear the bacteria, but the sources we reviewed show that this 50-year dogma is finally starting to crack.
The science is finally catching up, yeah. For decades, drug development for TB was stagnant. Nobody wanted to invest in it. But recently, a major global clinical trial known as Study 31 proved that we can actually cure drug-susceptible TB in just 4 months.
4 months? That's a third of the treatment time eliminated? How did they do it?
By swapping out some of the traditional first-line drugs for higher doses of a drug called rifampin, combined with an antibiotic called moxifloxacin. The WHO officially endorsed this shorter regimen recently.
That's huge. Cutting 2 entire months off the treatment is a massive win for health economics and, crucially, for patient adherence.
Because the shorter the marathon, the fewer chances there are for someone to experience pill fatigue and accidentally breed a superbug.
Exactly.
We're also finally seeing the first truly new drug mechanisms developed in over 40 years. We have new drugs like bedaquiline, which targets the bacteria's energy production, its ATP synthase, in a completely novel way. We are no longer entirely reliant on legacy discoveries from the 1950s and 60s.
That is incredibly hopeful. So just to wrap our heads around this entire journey for a second, we started with a terrifying armor-plated bacteria that Robert Koch could identify but couldn't touch.
Right.
Then shots isolate streptomycin from the dirt, which gave us a fleeting miracle but forced the invention of the randomized clinical trial. Then the failure of monotherapy forced us to understand the bacteria's different metabolic states, the fast growers, the trench hiders, and the sleeper cells.
Which ultimately led to the tactical brilliance of the modern multi-drug regimen.
Exactly. A biochemical solution that was then nearly derailed by human psychology, fear of orange tears, and systemic geopolitical collapses, forcing us to build global networks to literally watch people swallow pills.
It's a profound story about how brilliant pharmacology just isn't enough if you don't account for human behavior and logistics.
Right. But before we sign off, I'm stuck on something. We just spent this entire deep dive explaining, hammering home, really, that treating TB with just one drug is a total disaster.
Right. It guarantees deadly mutations. It's the cardinal sin of TB treatment.
Exactly. So where does that leave us with people who are exposed but not actively sick?
You are hitting on the ultimate pharmacological paradox of TB.
Because from what I read, if a patient is diagnosed with latent TB, meaning the bacteria is in their body, locked away in those dormant sleeper cells, and they have 0 symptoms, and normal chest x-rays, doctors will confidently prescribe them just one drug.
Yes. Often, they will be given just isoniazid monotherapy to take daily for up to 9 months.
But it totally contradicts everything we just outlined about selection pressure. Why does the ironclad multi-drug rule suddenly vanish for latent infections?
It all comes down to the raw math of genetic mutation. In a latent infection, the total number of bacteria in your body is incredibly low, because there are so few of them, and because they are dormant rather than actively replicating and copying their DNA, the statistical odds of a random genetic mutation occurring that happens to cause drug resistance are essentially 0.
Oh, so the math of mutation only works in the bacteria's favor when they have massive replicating numbers.
Precisely. In active TB, you have billions of replicating bacteria, so a mutant is guaranteed to exist. In latent TB, the population is so small that a single drug can wipe them out safely without triggering selection pressure.
Wow. That leaves us with a profound question about where we put our global resources. We put so much effort into inventing better, faster, four-drug cocktails to fight the disease when it's active, highly contagious, and actively destroying the lungs.
But is the real future of eradicating TB on a global scale less about winning that massive open war and more about finding those hidden sleeper cells in the healthy population?
And quietly taking them out with a single pill long before they ever wake up. That is a fascinating shift in perspective.
It really makes you think differently about eradication.
Definitely something for you to mull over next time you pop a simple antibiotic for a sore throat and take for granted how easy it is. For this deep dive, that's all we have. Catch you next time.